30 years. That actually more places where people like to live have done extremely well, and this is true in Europe as well. I created a, just again to get you in sort of the logic of urban economics, the quality of life is the third ingredient in terms of what way urban economists think about the appeal of urban areas. So there's wages, there's the cost of living, and then there's quality of life. And the spatial equilibrium, this thought that people are moving across space and choosing places, and in the long run, for the same kind of person, every place offers more or less the same deal, guides urban thinking on this. Now that logic says if you see a place with high real wages, that's got really high wages relative to its rents, then you can bet something else is bad about that place. And if you see a place with really low real wages, you can bet that something good about this place. Okay? So I want to just take you to a simple correlation here between these are real wages, controlled for the cost of living, by metropolitan area size in 1970. And what you notice in 1970 is that big cities are paying much higher real wages. Now, part of that is, of course, the fact that cities are able to pay higher real wages because they're more productive. But the other part of it is these are places that people find tough to live in. Okay, that in fact, if I go back to my youth in New York, there was a lot of crime, there was a lot of other social problems, and people actually didn't want to live there. You had to pay them a premium to do so. Look at that same correlation in 2000; it's disappeared. In 1970, you had to pay combat pay to get people to live in these cities. In 2000, you actually get a slight premium. It isn't that these places have gotten lower wages. They're paying more than ever. It's the prices have gone up to more than offset them. And it's that decline in correlation that's actually a good thing. The fact that you have lower real wages in New York relative to other places than you did in 1970, that's an advantage. That's actually a sign that New York is actually fixing its quality of life problems. You can then use this logic to create an amenity index basically by asking which places have high rents or have high housing prices holding incomes constant. This is just to show you the places in the US that seem to be attractive. You'll notice 9 of them are in California and the 10th is in Hawaii. And the other ones are places that end up low on this amenity index. I think the places in Connecticut are probably a mistake. They're part of New York, and we probably have slightly mismeasured income in these areas. But the other 7 are a rogues gallery of American cities. Some of them are too cold, some of them are too hot. None of them are places that people like to go for fun. And this is what you get when you look at this amenity index and growth over the past 20 years. So places that are attractive, places have brought in more people, and it's partly about luring workers, and it's partly about luring entrepreneurs. Okay, the other side of New York's being expensive is the restrictions on building. And I can't emphasize the importance of this enough in the Indian context, right? If I would think of one thing that needs to be rethought in Indian cities, it's actually limits on development. It's actually limits on height. And it's something that I think in the US hasn't gotten enough attention, and I'm certain that it hasn't gotten enough debate in India, okay? That let me just go to a graph, okay? On the x-axis is the amount of building in an American city. On the y-axis is the price, okay? If you thought the only thing that was going on in American cities was that there were some places that were attractive and some places that weren't, then you'd expect to see this thing looking like a ray from the origin. There were some places that were expensive that built a lot and some places that were cheap that didn't. But that's not what you see. The places that are expensive don't build a lot. The places that build a lot aren't expensive. There are some places down there like Youngstown, Ohio, okay, that are both cheap and don't have any building. Those are low demand places, certainly. But no one can tell me that Las Vegas is low demand, or Phoenix, or any of the 4 fastest growing metropolitan areas in the country, Atlanta, Dallas, Houston, and Phoenix. Okay? And no one can tell me that San Francisco and New York are low demand, because they've got these insane prices. But some places respond by building more, and some places respond by just letting the prices go up. Okay? And you have to ask yourself, what's actually been causing this? And some fraction of this is land availability. But in fact, my home county of Middlesex County is less dense than is Harris County, Texas, the home of Houston. Okay? It has more land, okay, available. And in fact, some of the most expensive areas in California have enormous amounts of land, and yet they don't allow building there. And these are regulatory decisions that are being inflicted, and they have purposes. There are reasons that are given for them, but there's a question as to whether or not they're sensible ones. In cities, the equivalent of suburban zoning that keeps out lower income people by making it difficult to build is restrictions on building up, is low floor area ratios, are things that stop new construction from actually providing. That's always the escape valve in cities. And a great way to have cities working without traffic jams is to have people living in tall towers and then moving essentially by elevator. Elevator is a great form of public transportation. Okay, it's you know, and then walking to another thing. This requires rows of skyscrapers next to each other. It is madness that you don't see more of this in Mumbai. Right? It is madness in the high demand, high income areas that you don't see more height going up and more people that are actually just, you know, using walking. And it's something that actually could exist. You know, it's also madness that you don't see more height in Boston. But again, these are artificial restrictions that are put on things. I'm going to move on through this. The last point I want to make is just about the environment, and I just have a little story about this. But the strange thing, of course, is that these restrictions on building are often given as being environmentally justified. But this is actually a mistake most of the time. And the story I want to tell is about that fellow. That fellow is Henry David Thoreau, patron saint of environmentalism. On a pleasant spring day in 1844, Thoreau went out for a picnic in woods not far away from Walden Pond. It was a dry day. There hadn't been a lot of rain for a while, and as a result, the fishing was good. And they cooked a chowder. As they were cooking the chowder, the flames spread from the chowder to the nearby grass. Okay? A forest fire ensued. No less than 400 acres of the best conquered woodland were burnt down by this environmentalist. Okay? He did more damage. I mean, he was castigated by his neighbors. He thought him this incredibly irresponsible enemy of the woodlands. They called him a flibbertigibbet, which is a great insult in 19th century Concord. He did more damage than any equivalent Boston merchant did. Okay? There's a lesson here. If you like nature, stay away from it. Okay? That in fact human beings are far less destructive to cities, far less destructive to the environment when they're clustered together in dense urban areas, when they're living in urban areas and high-rises than when they're living in, you know, sprawling suburbs surrounded by trees. And in fact, by restricting development in areas close to city centers, we're actually making, you know, increasing carbon emissions, pushing stuff further out. I don't really want to go through this too much, but I've done